Thank you for joining us and welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly, where we discuss the latest in Israel's geopolitical developments. I'm Aaron Porras, and with me today are former Knesset member Dr. Einat Wilf and Dr. Mordechai Kedar of the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies at Bar Ilan University, who also served for 25 years in the IDF military intelligence. Now today, our discussion will be focused on the United States' departure from the Iranian nuclear agreement, followed up by the recently ratified Palestinian reunification agreement. Now, so first, United States President Donald Trump made major headlines recently when he refused to recertify that Iran was adhering to the JCPOA nuclear agreement. Now, Congress has just 60 days to decide what they can and are willing to do with the United States' involvement in the deal and whether to reimpose sanctions on the Iranian regime or not. The president came to this decision after, quote, clear-eyed assessment of the Iranian dictatorship, its sponsorship of terrorism, and its continuing aggression in the Middle East and all around the world, end quote. Leaders and policymakers from all over the world have voiced very mixed reactions.
It is not a bilateral agreement. It does not belong to any single country, and it is not up to any single country to terminate it.
President Trump's refusal to recertify is a grave mistake that threatens America's security and our credibility at a very critical time. The president is ignoring the overwhelming consensus of nuclear scientists, national security experts, generals, and his own cabinet, including reportedly the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. The fact is, Iran remains in compliance with the nuclear agreement.
I congratulate President Trump for his courageous decision today. He boldly confronted Iran's terrorist regime. If the Iran deal is left unchanged, one thing is absolutely certain. In a few years' time, the world's foremost terrorist regime will have an arsenal of nuclear weapons, and that's a tremendous danger for our collective future.
ادب و اخلاق هم بسیار اهمیت داره. حرفهای ناصحیح، ناروا، دروغ، اتهامات بی اساس نسبت به ملت بزرگ ایران ما نسبت به برجام به عنوان یک معاهده چند جانبه و بین المللی به یک معنا تا زمانی که حقوق ما تأمین می شود، تا زمانی که منافع ما اقتضا می کند، تا زمانی که ما از منافع برجام برخوردار هستیم، در چارچوب منافع ملی و مصالح ملی به برجام احترام می‌کنیم.
So, Dr. Wilf, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to open the discussion to you. As we've just heard, you know, several countries have already stated that this is not something the United States can get out of anyway. So, you know, does the United States have any grounds to change anything?
First of all, it does. It's not really an agreement. It's an understanding where every side adheres to understandings. So this is why Iran can say, we will continue, and the United States can say, we will re-examine. It was built as something that is not really an agreement. But it really, in many ways, doesn't matter. It doesn't, just as it didn't matter before whether Iran was really working to create nuclear weapons or whether now it's adhering to the agreement. What matters is the view of the alliances. President Obama viewed Iran as a potentially positive force in the region. He wanted to bring it into the alliances. He re-examined previous alliances, such as with Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And President Trump is changing. He wants strong alliance with Saudi Arabia. He doesn't want Iran as part of the alliances. In general, he's not a president who likes agreements very much, as we know. He's in the process of pretty much getting the United States out of every agreement, various international bodies. So the actual details don't matter so much as the greater process that President Trump is doing.
All right, Dr. Kedar, you know, if Trump actually manages to exit the deal, what happens in the Middle East?
Well, it's a very big question. Actually, today, many in the Middle East deal with this question, what will be if America goes out from this agreement. and has its own policy vis-a-vis Iran, including using force. And this is what everybody is afraid of or is hoping for, depends who you are. Because as we all know, this agreement, which is not actually an agreement, it's an understanding, as Dr. Wolf just said, the Europeans are interested in one thing, money. That's all. Investments and selling their goods to the Iranians. This is what concerns them. America apparently talks about security, as President Trump just said. He doesn't want missiles, he doesn't want nuclear weapons, and money, of course. He wants also jobs, but this comes only the second priority. For him, the first priority is security, and this is why he doesn't like this agreement.
So do you think that this makes the United States look weak, though? Like, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said, among other people have also said that?
It doesn't make it look weak. It makes it look questionable. Weak is a clear position. I think what people now have is just a big question mark over where the United States is heading. What does it want to do? What is its vision of a world order?
Do you think that affects international agreements in other?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people are now beginning to understand that the United States under President Trump is willingly and consciously unraveling the international order that the United States helped build after World War II. So when President Trump says, we think of President Trump as being crazy and inconsistent, and he says one thing and then another, but actually here there's a consistency from the inauguration speech of America First, from the campaign of America First, and to the process of not approving the Trans-Pacific Agreement, looking at NAFTA, getting out of UNESCO, getting out or reassessing the JCPOA. All of these are part of a view that says, I don't think we really need the world. I don't think the United States needs the world, and let's look into it.
Yes, but it's correct when it comes to Europe and other countries. But when it comes to the Middle East, people now start taking the United States seriously.
Really?
Because Obama succeeded to turn the United States into a paper tiger. When it comes to the Middle East, just look at the Russians, how they behave here, regardless of what Americans say. Just look at the Syrians, what they did in their country. Who takes America seriously under Obama? For more than 8 years, until today, the Middle East actually mocks at America. America became nothing. Maybe this speech, which might be accompanied with actions, this will what bring America to a stage of credibility in the Middle East. Because so far, America lost its credibility totally in the Middle East. Maybe now, after such a thing, and if, of course, if it will come with actions later, people will start taking America seriously.
So you mentioned some of the actions that the United States might take and how that might affect the persona in the Middle East. But let's look at some of those actions actually and see how effective they might be. So first, working with allies to counter the regime's destabilizing activity and support for terror proxies. Placing additional sanctions on the regime to block their financing of terror. Addressing the regime's proliferation of missiles and weapons that threaten its neighbors, authorizing the Treasury Department to further sanction the IRGC for its support for terror, and finally denying the regime all paths to a nuclear weapon, and then he goes on to list paths to do that.
Well, so far it's all words.
Right.
The Iranians define between two things. One is a threat, and one is a credible threat. A threat means nothing, because they heard threats on left, right, and center. Credible threat is when they start taking you seriously. And their history is full. I can give you several examples how the Iranians actually act or do not act according to the feeling of the credibility of a threat. Only when their threat is credible, they start taking you seriously.
Okay. Do you think that they'll follow through? Does this sound like something Trump might follow through on? I mean,
the biggest thing really, and the one that concerns the regime, is the question whether the United States will restore sanctions. And that is through Congress. So now everything is back to Congress, and we're back with the whole debate and lobbying of Congress, and everything opens up. That will be a game changer. I think we're still very far from the process of restoring the sanctions. Congress can send it back to the president can rethink it. I don't think we're there just yet. This will really change the situation if sanctions will be restored. we're not there yet. As to the question of whether President Trump will really take actions, I actually think that with respect to the Middle East, maybe he has more credibility today with countries such as Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Israel to a degree. It's not clear that he is more interested in engaging in the Middle East than President Obama. I actually think in that sense, he is continuing his predecessor's policy of disengaging from the region.
Really?
His predecessors was disengaging from the region by strengthening Iran. He is disengaging from the region, I think, by strengthening maybe Saudi Arabia, Israel, to a degree, Egypt. But the notion that America is committed to the Middle East in the same way that it was in the 60s and 70s and 80s, I actually think the working assumption of Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others is even if America is now nicer to them, it is still in the process of getting out of the region.
I see.
Well, but we have to remember another element which we didn't mention yet, which is North Korea. Because today there is much of evidence that Iran and North Korea are actually in the same bed. And for Trump today, if you say North Korea, he's getting very angry. And if he sees North Korea with Iran together as a threat to America, this is what will change the game. And this is something which is totally detached from any history of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This is something which is Trump now has to face the problem of North Korea, which is somehow comes together with the Iranian issue. And we saw the Iranian nuclear facility on Syria, which is the mock of the Yongbyon reactor on Syria by Iranian money. And the American intelligence agencies have much evidence of the connection, about the connection between North Korea and Iran, especially when it comes to the missile, long-range missiles, ballistic missiles. So this is why I think today the Iranians should shake of fear, and they do. And the speech of Rouhani is in my view, and I hear his language, how he speaks from fear, and it is shown on his face, his body language, and the formulation which he uses. This all come out of fear, because he is afraid today that he will find himself in the same bed with the North Koreans against the wrath of Trump.
All right. Well, if Iran finds itself in the same position as North Korea, as you've just stated, then we could have another regime that, like North Korea, has been trying to prompt a war for a very long time. Are we going to see a war in the Middle East, a possible sparking of World War III, considering all the other powers that are involved?
It's not World War III. It's one big bomb on Tehran and one big bomb on Pyongyang, and somebody knows, and everybody knows who is the master here.
Dr. Wolf?
Okay, let's stop the launch codes for a moment. I think, first of all, the Iranian regime is still very far from that. We should know also that Iran, contrary to North Korea, is a far more open country. And I think what's different in this case, what President Trump did, the agreement or the understandings with Iran have to do with its nuclear facilities. That's it. They say nothing about terrorism. They say nothing about Islam. They say nothing about the regime. What he did in his speech, and one can debate whether it's a good idea or not, but he brought in these issues. He talked about a rogue regime, sponsorship of terrorism. These are not part of the understandings. So the fact that he doesn't like it doesn't mean that Iran is not abiding by the understandings. So he wants now to bring this into the debate. Fine. If his steps will actually lead to moderation on these issues, great. But there's no question that he's rattling the situation, thinking that something good will come out. The difference is always the United States, as it was with World War I, II, and the way now, the United States can let the world burn, and it's doing fine. Other countries, oh, absolutely. The United States benefits from its geopolitical situation separated by two seas, two oceans, neighbors, Canada and Mexico. The world did burn in World War II for years. New York, Chicago, LA had the time of their lives until the United States got into the war. So America can afford to let a whole lot of mayhem happen in the world and not take any step. So the kind of risk assessment that America has is very different from a country like Israel. Israel cannot afford to take the kind of risks that an America can. And in that sense, we have a very different assessment. If the American president is wrong, the consequences to America are small. If he's wrong, the consequences to Israel are much greater.
All right, so let's hope that the consequences will be minimal as possible. Anyway, to move on to our next subject, Palestinians across the West Bank and Gaza are celebrating following the recent signing of a reconciliation agreement between rival factions Fatah and Hamas in Cairo. Egypt helped broker the deal, whose details have still not fully been released, but whatever the details are, it seems that this new unity is unified against Israel.
أولاً هذه المرة بتعليمات الرئيس أبو مازن والتأكيد يجب أن لا تعودوا إلا وأنتم متفقون. يجب طي صفحة الانقسام إلى الأبد لنوحد جهود الشعب الفلسطيني بكل قوة وفي مقدمتهم فتح وحماس حتى نستطيع مجابهة الاحتلال من أجل تحقيق الحلم الفلسطيني بإنهاء هذا الاحتلال البغيض وتجسيد إقامة الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة ذات السيادة والقدس.
When you see something great, you say, yeah, it's great, I hope it will last forever. And then you, as a moment of silence, you think about it, what if it did not last forever?
At the end, they will have a point that they will separate because two different mentalities.
إن شاء الله يعني في خير. في بوادر خير والكل بتنازل يعني ما زال في تنازلات في مصالحات. أنا مبسوط كتير. يعني أنا لو في بارودة بطخ عشان اصطلحوا.
All right, so in the wake of this reconciliation agreement, what is Israel thinking right now, Dr. Kadal?
Well, I don't know who in Israel thinks about this because I really don't know what people here think. What I know is what I think means what I hear from those people.
All right.
We watched this movie time and again in Mecca, in Cairo, in many other places. The same slogans, the same speeches, the same words, the same thing, and time and again they continue to quarrel. Why? It's not the big agreement, it's the details. And as you know, the Satan is the devil is
the
always
in the
details. The details means, look, what do they want? Hamas today is on a bankruptcy from the financial point of view. And they need somebody to come and bring the money for oil, for electricity, for health system, for everything which they need because they cannot provide anymore. On the other side, the Fatah is in a bankruptcy on the social point of view because nobody in the social arenas want them because they are corrupt. They are viewed as a mishmar hagvul, as they call them, the guardians of Israel, and everybody hates them. Some about the Halan as well. So both are in bankruptcy. So they meet together in order to help each other. However, Hamas want an agreement which will enable them to act like Hezbollah in Lebanon. Means to continue with the weapons, to continue with the tunnels, to continue with
But the Palestinian
missiles,
Authority already
everything.
made it clear that they don't want a Hamas military wing.
They can hide behind the apron of the Palestinian Authority, just like what the world accepts in Lebanon. This is the scenario. This is why the agreement didn't mention the weapons, didn't mention the army of Hamas, didn't mention the dismantling of the tunnels, didn't mention anything of the sort. Means Hamas will continue fighting us, and we'll find ourselves in the PLO protecting Hamas. This is what they want.
Dr. Wolf, how would you respond first, and then I have a follow-up question as well.
Well, first of all, it's for them. They wanted to achieve it for a very long time. If they're trying, they're doing it, fine. For me, what I'm looking at it is not so much about the question of the unity and whether they'll succeed or not. The one positive sign that I'm taking from it is if this really indicates a growing Egyptian involvement in the situation, a growing Egyptian assumption of some kind of responsibility, sponsorship over the Gaza Strip, That is a positive development for Israel.
Okay.
The more we have Egypt as a kind of joint caretaker, someone who can be responsible, I think the better for Israel. So to the extent that this process signifies Egypt playing a greater role with respect to the Palestinians, I think generally good things can come out of that.
I mean, well, and that kind of leads me into my follow-up, which is what are the pros and cons? Because of course the cons are that we have a unified enemy on both fronts. But a possible pro is that, you know, with any possible two-state solution, you would need these two factions to be working together, would you not?
Well, first of all, I would like to take over what the guy named Basel said, which he showed before.
Sure.
He talked about different cultures between Gaza and the West Bank. And actually, it was shown here because Azam al-Ahmad goes with a necktie and Salah Haruri goes without. And this is a big difference. It's a big difference because Hamas, they don't believe in Western symbols, neither government or nothing. This is why they never will go with necktie. Why? Look at this. This is exactly this. Haruri, the one who just got up, goes without a necktie. This is a culture. It's not a matter of he has a necktie, but he doesn't wear it deliberately. And look, everybody from Hamas, from his side, are going without neckties because it signifies their culture. They don't want to be shunned by the West and the Western ideas of even of clothing. While Bassam al-Ahmad, he plays the game of the Western-like person.
So again, you're saying this is doomed to fail.
You see now in the picture, everybody from Hamas without a necktie, and they are with. And look, it's not only what you wear, it's how you think, what your mindset. And this is what Basel said. It's a different culture. You cannot combine these two. Gaza is a totally different culture. The language is different from the West Bank. Also, this is why this unification is artificial, temporary, and between you and me, between weeks and few months when it will blow up.
Well, but I mean, what about security cooperation? Because with Fatah, Israel has security cooperation into the West Bank.
Of course.
If
Fatah
is now bringing in security cooperation into Hamas, does that not extend to Israel?
What do you think this cooperation is against? Against Hamas. So how can the PLO now cooperate with us against Hamas, their partners, or the alleged partners? This is something which, in my view, will blow up eventually, again, between weeks and months.
Do you agree?
Or it won't. We'll have to see. I mean, it hasn't succeeded in the past. You can talk about the differences in cultures. Every society has differences in cultures. We've seen it in America and the UK. The question is, do they have a sense of a single national identity? Do they have a sense of a single national purpose? Is it greater than their sense of being a different cultures? Generally, it is. And I do think there are positive elements in the sense of we're seeing greater Egyptian involvement. Will that lead to moderation? I think it's still a long road ahead. Whether it's Fatah or Hamas, we are looking either way at an organization that cannot agree to anything that Israel can agree. So with or without unification, we're not very close to a two-state solution. Okay. But if this means that Egypt, Jordan are now taking greater responsibility, as a rule, that's a good thing for Israel.
All right, so with that, let's actually move into our silver lining portion of the show. And why don't you try and give us another follow-up to that with a silver lining, something positive with all the negative that's mixed up.
The holidays are over. We're back to usual.
And hopefully we'll have some peace.
In my view, this is the hope, because when this agreement between PLO and Hamas will break up, somebody will come up with a real solution, the 8 Emirate solution, the only solution which can work in the Middle East. Emirates is the only thing which works in the Middle East because it's based on the families, the local families, not on the criminals which we brought from Tunisia, including Abu Mazen and the others Islamists from Gaza.
And they will all have oil.
Of course.
Because they're Emirates, right?
All right.
Of course.
All right. Now, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today's edition of ILTV's Israel Weekly. Thank you again to our guests, Dr. Wilf and Dr. Kedal, for joining us, joining me and you guys in the studio. And thank you for tuning in. See you next week. Shalom from Israel.